Hi, I'm Matt Lacey, a web analyst at Applied Web Analytics, and this is the second in our two-part video tutorial on how to exclude query parameters within Google Analytics. In the first episode, we looked at how you can work out a list of all the query parameters that your website produces, and in this, the second part, we're going to look at how you can work out which query parameters can be safely excluded within Google Analytics, and then we're going to move over into Google Analytics and look at how you would actually go about making sure that they're excluded. We're going to start by doing a quick recap of some of the things we looked at in the first episode, but if you haven't seen that first episode and you would like to, I'd recommend that you go to www.appliedwebanalytics.com/blog, and you'll be able to see our most recent posts, and you're looking for the query parameters part 1. In the first episode, we looked at how to carefully select and filter your data and then move that data across into Excel, where we stripped it down and ended up with what you can see here, which is a full list of all the query parameters that were produced for the site that we were looking at. Now that we know how to work out a full set of query parameters for the website, the next step is to look at how we can work out which query parameters can be safely excluded within Google Analytics. And the way we're going to do this is by looking at two examples. In the first of these examples, we can see that the query parameter is code. That's between the question mark, which signals the beginning of the query parameter string, and before the equal sign, which separates a query parameter and its value. And in the second example, we can therefore see that the query parameter is attribute. And these are the two examples that we're going to use. So what I've done is find a page where there is an instance of that query parameter. So on this page, you can hopefully see that the URL is www.blacks.co.uk/product.html, followed by question mark, code equals, and then the value. And what we're going to do to test if this page can be safely excluded within Google Analytics is to remove the query parameter, and we're going to remove the question mark as well to remove the whole query parameter string. And what we're going to do is delete that and then press enter. And if the page stays exactly the same, we'll know that it's not important to the structure of the URL. But as is the case in this example, you can see that the page has actually changed. It has changed the structure of the URL, and now we're given to a product unavailable page, which means that if we were to exclude this within Google Analytics, then we would lose the distinction between those two pages. Here we can see that this URL contains the second example that we're going to look at, and that's attribute, and it's right on the end tagged. If you look at the end of the address bar here, question mark attribute equals, and then its value. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to select the query parameter string up to and including the question mark, and I'm going to press delete, and then I'm going to press enter. And what you can see is that this time the query parameter appended to the end of the URL wasn't important in the structure of the page, so even once it's removed we can still see that we get exactly the same page, which means that within Google Analytics this parameter attribute could be safely excluded. Now that we've worked out how to decide which query parameters can be safely excluded and which can't, we're going to move over into Google Analytics, and I'll show you where you would input that information. So once you've logged into Google Analytics, we want to go into the profile settings and edit profile information. And once we're in here, this is a place where you can change the profile name, website URL, default page, time zone. But what we're interested in is the next box, which is called exclude URL query parameters. And it's here that we can enter all the query parameters that we have identified as being safe to exclude. So in the examples we looked at, we decided that code couldn't be safely excluded, but that the query parameter attribute could. So I'm going to type that into this box here. And if we had others that we'd found could be safely excluded, we'd follow it with a comma and simply enter the other query parameters here. One other thing to be aware of is that if your website has an internal site search, we can use query parameters to identify the search terms that your visitors are using. Staying within the Edit Profile Information section of Google Analytics, we can see that further down on the page there is a section titled Site Search, and we're going to click Do Track Site Search. And the first box that we have in front of us is query parameters, and what that means is that in order to collect the data about the search terms that have been used, we'll identify which query parameter is used in the URL structure to signify that a site search has taken place. A common example that you might see is something like Q equals followed by the search term, and if that was the case, then you'd simply enter into this box Q, and that would mean that any search terms that were searched for in your internal site search would then be tracked, and you'd be able to see those within Google Analytics. And what you can also do is check this box which says yes, strip query parameters out of URL, and that will do much the same as adding it in the box above. It will take those off the URL structures within Google Analytics and give you URLs that are much easier to read. Your website may also be set up to separate internal site searches into different categories, and if it is, then you can use this section just below. We're going to choose yes to do you use categories for site search, and what you'll find is that if your website is set up for categories of search, then there will be a parameter associated with those categories. So you might find something like search cat, so in the URL structure on the results page you might find search cat equals, and you could have something like search cat equals men or women or children, and they may be the categories that you use, but there may be other categories, and the category parameter will vary according to the way your website is built or the content management system that you use, in a similar way to the main site search query parameter, and we're going to check yes again to strip the category parameters, and we can then click Save Changes. And so that brings us to the end of this tutorial and our two-part series in how to identify and safely exclude query parameters within Google Analytics. If you found it useful or you have any questions, please leave a comment below, and make sure you come back next month to see the latest edition in our video tutorial series.